Good evening, everybody. I'm just admitting a few more people and inviting people who are not yet muted to do so. But I think I probably know most of you, so this might be superfluous, but I'm Alison from Sizewell C, and I'm joined this evening by Charles and Paul to talk about the Secretary of State's invitation to interested parties to respond to new information that may have emerged as a result of a series of questions that he asked to mostly the applicant, but also other stakeholders. So before we get going, obviously, I hope there's no one here who's unaware that the DCO decision has been delayed just over 6 weeks now till the 8th of July. We think that when the Secretary of State sent out this invitation to interested parties to send in their comments with a deadline of almost midnight on the 23rd of May, they must have realised that it would be impossible for them to properly read and assess all of that. So they probably knew in April, at the time that they sent this invitation out, that they were going to have to delay the decision. But I have to say, you know, my personal speculation is that announcing a delay at that stage was a little bit too close to the release of the energy strategy, in which this 24 gigawatts of nuclear energy was kind of a real centerpiece. So to announce within a very short period of time that there's going to be a delay to the sort of next project in line, I think perhaps was considered, you know, not a great idea. But I also want to reassure you that, you know, we're now sort of looking to July for the decision date, but there's still a really long way to go on this project. Some of you may have received an email this morning from the Environment Agency announcing that they're expecting to start a 12-week consultation period on the permits that EDF have applied for in late June. So that makes it very unlikely, if you consider there's 12 weeks of consultation and then they've got to look at all the consultation responses, that those permits would be issued, you know, at all before the autumn. And EDF last night said that they were sort of targeting mid-2023 for a final investment decision on Sizewell C. And that's the big crunch point where, you know, it's decided whether this project is actually going to go ahead or not. And that's still, you know, a year away. So I do want to just remind everybody that the previous incarnation of Hinkley C was granted planning consent in the 1990s and was never built. So it does not mean, even if Sizewell C were to get planning consent, that the project would definitely go ahead. So, you know, we've still got absolutely everything to play for. So I'm going to hand over first to Charles and then to Paul in a minute to talk us through the issues that have emerged through the Secretary of State's questions. And then I'll come back after they've spoken and just say a very little bit about the sort of procedure for responding. And then we'll have time for some questions and answers. But I did want to say that we've created a web page on our site, stopsizewellc.org, called Pre-Decision. And there is a link on the home page to this, but if you want to check it out, we'll put the video on here now, we'll put some abbreviated guidance on there, and we'll also put a link to a detailed response that Stop Sizewell C has submitted in partnership with Theberton Eastbridge Parish Council, Middleton Camfordley Parish Council, the B1122 Action Group, and the Minsmere Level Stakeholder Group. So there's going to be a lot of information online, you know, in the course of the next 24 hours or so. Right, so having said all that, I'm going to pass to Charles.
Thanks, Ali. Excuse me, what I'm going to do is paraphrase a lot of what has been in the correspondence, because as anybody has attempted to read the paperwork that flows backwards and forwards between BEIS and EDF, the language is not very accessible. But the big issue from a roads point of view, or more the point, the issue that the Secretary of State has honed in on, which I must admit I'm very pleased about, is what's called the early years. That is the 2 years before the link road in particular, and indeed the Farnham bypass, would be built. The issue there is, of course, that the dear old B1122 that we know and love would be carrying a huge amount of traffic. The latest numbers that they've come up with is up to 600 HGVs a day, but also because the park and rides won't be in action at that point, it will be a huge number of private vehicles. And a lot of these will be pretty early in the morning and late in the evening. So the road, the current B1122 will have virtually no significant change to it. There's a little bit of footpath activity going to be happening in Theberton and on Middleton Moor, and some possible pedestrian crossings. But the wiggles and bends and bumps and lumps will be very much there. And I leave it to you to reflect on what that will do for public safety on some of the sort of hidden bends on the road, as well as the congestion and the ability for us to get where we want to go. And indeed, for those of us who live actually on the B1122, the noise and disruption and pollution that's going to cause. Which is why I think, Bayes and the Secretary of State have honed in on this and have asked EDF in a roundabout way, what if we waited until you'd finished the link road before you started construction? Which of course EDF reacted to very strongly. It's actually quite entertaining if you step back from it, but getting all terribly huffy about how vital it was that the thing was built quickly when they've been spending years sitting on their hands, and reflecting back to various national policy statements on the need for speed. So if you are choosing to write on this particular subject, I would focus primarily on the fact that the unimproved B1122 will be required to carry a huge amount of traffic. Interestingly, at consultation stage 2, way back in the dim memory, before the link road was proposed, it was at that point suggested the B1122 might carry this level of traffic. But there was a considerable amount of changes and improvements proposed at that point in order to make that capable. For some reason, that isn't now necessary. So even if the numbers are back to that time, the 600 plus, nevertheless, those improvements that were proposed back then aren't happening. So that's the main point that you might want to make. Another point that you might want to make is around the poor choice of the link road route, and the fact that the county council and indeed local villages and of course B1122 group were campaigning for a long time for a cross-country route known as Route W from south of Saxmundham, which would have not caused these problems because it could be built without interrupting the regular traffic. So that's essentially where we have an opportunity to push back against EDF, and I urge you to do so. So that's all from me on roads, and I'm now going to pass over to Paul.
Thanks, Charles. Just one other point on the roads that perhaps Charles hasn't covered. EDF are assuming EDF actually get their permission to do this in SLR in parallel. There will also be 3 months of road resurfacing on the B1122 in the first 3 months of the project. So that's going to be another level of chaos anyway, whilst that goes on. So to move on to the other items, I mean, Alison has shown you the link that is up on the Stop Sizewell C website. There is a brief document there, which actually also has some links into other documents that are necessary, including the 3 main EDF responses to the Secretary of State's questions. There are also quite a number of annexes which go into much more detail, but I think unless you really you like some scientific fact and detail, then the three documents will give you most of the information that you, or at least most of the items that you might want to respond to. We've also put links on there back into the Sizewell C DCO index in case you don't have it. So if you want to look for the other annexes in there, you could do that. And there's also a link to Nick Scar's documents on both on coastal issues and on the storage of spent nuclear fuel, which are worth having a look at if you are minded to look at those sorts of issues in your response. So there are, in the main response from 7th Eastbridge Parish Council and the groups that Alison talked about, we've looked at, as well as the B1122 issues, there's quite a lot of specific items in there. If you go into the main report or the main response, blow by blow on various claims from EDF, which will support what Charles is saying for you. There's also a whole bunch of stuff on coastal process monitoring and the over-reliance on that as a way of mitigating any issues that arise on the frontage. There are still issues about exactly where the hard coastal defence is, particularly at the southern end, and the impact of closing Sizewell B at some point in the future, which at the moment is 2035, which is the same time as Sizewell C is supposed to start. But as we know, they've asked for a 20-year extension, or they're going to ask for a 20-year extension. Whether they get it or not is an interesting question, simply because Sizewell B would not be allowed right now because it doesn't correspond to the requirements post-Fukushima. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. But I would assume that it's certainly going to be extended. How long is a good question. So there's a bunch of information about that and some links that go back into various documents that have already been submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. So you can take a look at that if you wish. The other issue around spent nuclear fuel is the fact that EDF are still claiming that they can be decommissioned and have all fuel off-site by 2140. This doesn't really stack up against statements in the legislation EN6, which says the earliest that anything can, it'll take them until 2135 to get rid of all of the spent fuel and all of the high-level waste from the existing old nuclear power stations before they can start dealing with new nuclear, which will include, obviously, Hinkley Point C as well, assuming it gets finished and is operational. So it's highly unlikely that that's the case. And in fact, when you look at various articles and submissions from people like the ONR and the EA, they're talking about 2190, certainly towards the end of the next century, before that is potentially going to be possible. So there's a big dichotomy there. And we actually had a meeting with Greg Hands earlier this week, who is the Minister for Nuclear, and pointed this out, that there seems to be a big difference of opinion. And we asked him to tell us who's right. The other point of that is that if you look at EDF's evaluations of flood risk, beyond 2140, there are issues in that the flood defences don't seem to be sufficient to actually cope with what is the most conservative estimates of sea level rise, storm surge, and everything else. So they've chosen 2140 because the current plans actually manage that. But go beyond there and you're into red flag territory. All of that is there, and I would recommend, if you want to do that, do have a look at Nick Scar's response, and there is a link to that. We all know about the significant issue of no potable water supply. There's a big piece, there is a significant piece in our response to that, so please do go and look at that. All of that is still subject to further assessments and agreement through Ofwat and various in order to improve the supply in this area, either through desalination, wastewater recovery, or whatever it happens to be for Northumbrian Water Limited. So it's by no means a straightforward process, despite what EDF might say, and the fact that they then want the Secretary of State asked about whether they could have a permanent desalination plant on site, which was allowed for in the evaluation of the EPR by the ONR, of the reactor by the Office for Nuclear Regulation. It is down there as something that is possible. The issue again with Sizewell is space. We already know that this site is extremely compact, should we say, and certainly one of their suggestions is that they bury a desalination plant on what is now Goose Hill, but it will still further degrade that part of the site post construction and cause more problems. Another suggestion is that they take some of the space that has now been earmarked for the Sizewell B relocation, and the pillbox field becomes a car park once again, which is currently going to be mitigation for the chopping down of Coronation Wood and various other parts of the site. So there's a whole bunch of that in the response. If you want to take a look at that, it's certainly something that you can take away and actually use. Still problems with the unsupported biodiversity net gain claims. And last night at the meeting we had with EDF, they tried to say that the 19% was all about the fact that they had purchased further land which they were going to rewild, which is just, I don't know, it's pretty much a lie actually, because that's not the issue. The issue is they have a site which is of zero biodiversity for nearly 12 to 15 years. And even the sites that they have purchased are not doing that well. And there aren't that many of them. It doesn't account for a 19% increase. Last thing that is still there and is pointed out in our response is that actually, if you look at the Environment Bill or the Environment Act 2021, it has some very specific requirements. And now the DCO application does not meet those requirements in a number of ways. They're not using the right, what's the word? I've lost the word for it. The right metric assessment, version 3, which is required by that bill. They did look at it during the DCO, but they declined to actually publish the results. We did look at it, and it makes the whole thing look even worse than it already looks. So there's a bunch of things there you can talk about. And despite everything else, you're not allowed to claim any biodiversity net gain if you build on a site of special scientific interest, which they're going to do on Sizewell Marsh. So always round, this does not meet any of the requirements of current legislation. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there about habitat regulations and assessments, which, to be quite frank, we're not qualified to actually deal with that, but we know the RSPB, Suffolk Wildlife Trust and others are dealing with it. And in fact, there is a link to what there are some documents already on the website that have been submitted by them if you want to take a look at that. But we haven't actually done anything about that because they're much better qualified than we are. The last thing, I don't know whether Alison's going to say this, if you do look at those documents, please personalize them. If it looks like cut and paste, they're not going to read them. So do paraphrase, do whatever you like, but make them personal and different. And that way you will actually then get they will be read, they have to be read. But if it looks like cut and paste, it is not going to work. So that's it from me. I'll pass back to Alison. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And yes, absolutely. I was going to mention that, but I'll just say a few words about how to respond. I just want to really echo what Paul said. You know, it's critical that the responses are individualized. So really think about, you know, how this project will affect you. Really think about in the issues that have come up in the Secretary of State's questions and answers, you know, what there is in there that you feel most strongly about, and give examples where you can of things that you think EDF should have thought about beforehand. I mean, you know, this claim that, you know, they couldn't build the roads ahead of starting construction on the main site because they didn't survey that option, you know, that, I mean, it's just pathetic. There's no excuse whatsoever. They should have thought of every option. You know, just use every opportunity to really emphasize why these particular issues make you even more convinced that the project cannot go ahead. So yeah, include references to previous things that you've sent in, you know, your deadline 10 submissions, you know, or something that any other response, any other consultee has said as well. The way to respond is to send an email to the usual planning inspectorate email address, which is the Sizewell C at planninginspectorate.gov.uk, and that's on the website. It's on the Secretary of State's letter of invitation. You know, just email us if you're confused about which email to send it to, but just make sure that it is there by 23:59 on the 23rd of May. Now we were encouraging people to send their responses as close to the deadline as possible, you know, simply because it would have been you know, impossible for BEIS to read and assess everything properly. Now that the planning decision has been delayed, you know, it still would be desirable to send it in sort of towards the end of this consultation period, but it's no longer quite so critical. But what we really want to do is we want to see a large number of responses. So if you're an interested party, great, include your interested party number if you have one or if you can find it. But if you're not an interested party, and if you know people who you think might respond who aren't an interested party, just encourage them to do it, because, you know, this is a really important opportunity to send a very strong message in the sheer volume of responses to the Secretary of State that, you know, this is still an incredibly contentious project. So that's the kind of practicalities about it. I'm going to ask people to use the hand up feature if you have one or you can find it, to ask any questions you have either about the issues or about procedures. If you can't find your hand up, either send a message in the chat box or just sort of unmute, but just try not to talk over somebody else. So the first person that raised their hand was Alan. I'm going to invite you to unmute, Alan, and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. You
can indeed. Excellent. Good evening, everyone. My question is really just looking through some of the responses to the SOS. There's still obviously quite a lot of information that whether it's the EA or RSPB et al. Are saying they still have not got the information they need to actually sort of make a decision on a lot of things. So again, is that something that we ought to be saying to the Secretary of State, look, this information is simply not being made available for people to make a judgment, and therefore in that case you can, you know, you have to decline the DCO? Any comments?
Paul, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think we're both trying to never mind. I'm unmuted now. Yeah, I mean, if there are specific things that you feel that you need to know that you haven't got, but by all means do endorse the positions of people like the RSPB, you know, who in the end are, you know, really the experts, particularly in habitat regulations assessments and many of the environmental matters. So yeah, by all means do so.
Thanks. I've got Richard Gray next. Hi, Richard.
Hi there, everybody. One question which is directly related to what Paul just said. I haven't heard much active campaigning from the RSPB or Suffolk Wildlife. Is it that they're saving their thunder, or is it that what we've seen is all that we're going to get? Do you know? And my second question, which I'll put in just as then I'll switch off, is in responding to the Secretary of State, 23rd of May, or rather not the Secretary of State, to the Planning Inspectorate, is it best that we limit ourselves just to the queries raised by the Secretary of State, or are we wasting our time in raising other issues?
I'll respond on the first one, which is that I'm still speaking to the RSPB regularly, and I know they are still absolutely committed to their opposition to Sizewell C. I hope we'll see that in the coming weeks. In terms of limiting your response, my suggestion, and Paul, you can say what you think about this, is to address the issues that have arisen from the Secretary of State's questions first, but then feel free to say absolutely whatever else you like. But just kind of put that at the top, so that they will see that you have made an effort to respond specifically to those issues.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, do that, because there are also many issues, including what the RSPB is saying, that they don't have all of the information they require. So there's no reason not to actually bring those forward. If there are still issues that you feel that are open and should be more talked about, do it. But yeah, Alison's right. Answer their questions first, and if you've got it in any sort of structured way, and then put all of your other issues with that piece below it, so that it forces them to read that, and you then get the opportunity to update whatever you've already said. So do carry on.
Thanks, Richard. I've got Sally's iPhone, and looking at the very small video, I think that's islets.
Hello, yes, thank you very much, Alison. The main thing was value for money and the cost of the whole project. And I've tried to push our beloved MP to raise coffee on the matter, and she doesn't know. I did hear Kwasi Kwarteng SOS saying, I think it was yesterday, about the cost on everybody's electric bills, and he thought it was £30 a year, but he didn't know how long it was. Ultimately, it might bring electric bills down. Really, it was just, is there anything that we should respond to in the total cost? We all know how much materials are in short supply, how much things are going up, seems to be on a daily, hourly basis. And does actually anybody know what this wretched thing's going to cost?
Well, the answer is that if they do know, they're not saying. But we directly asked Greg Hands on Monday to share urgently with us a revised cost update. I asked Tom McGarry the same question last night, and he said he'd have to get back to me. But I think that's a really important point to put in any response, because it's in the public interest for that information to be known, because we're all going to have to contribute to that cost on our energy bills. Yeah, I think the Secretary of State's comments are interesting. He's clearly, a little bit befuddled by all of this. I mean, we have pointed out that the difference between the best and worst case scenarios in the impact assessment that BEIS has produced around what impact RAB would have on bills, is a threefold increase in the total that households would pay, from about £150 over the course of the construction to nearly £450 over the course of the construction. And of course, if you get more than one project running simultaneously, and the Prime Minister is on record as saying he wants to build a reactor a year, then you're going to have multiple RAB charges put on your bill. So I've been talking to journalists about this and hoping that they will write something, including about the overall cost. So fingers crossed, watch this space, but do put it in your response, because it's really important.
Thank you. And has the value for money bit been lost somewhere on the line? I mean, what is the value for money, and who's going to determine that?
Well, the value for money assessment is something that is done sort of pretty much at the last minute before a final investment decision is taken. So, that's still many months away. In fact, they do value for money assessments at various stages in the project's development, but it's all very secretive. And despite our efforts, you know, lots of questions were asked about this during the nuclear energy financing bill's passage through the Commons and the House of Lords. You know, the government kept saying, oh, it's not a good idea to show your hand when you're negotiating. Well, we said to Greg Hands on Monday, well, if you keep saying publicly that you're committed to Sizewell C, that's not a strong negotiating position, is it? So you can't have it both ways.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I now have Josie.
Just before Josie goes, I just thought I'd mention that Calcel Carlton are doing a response which is very much on value for money and costs. And we are still waiting for somebody to give an updated cost, as Alison says, to Sizewell C, because it is well out of date. But anyway, I don't know whether that's public yet, but maybe Edwina can tell us.
Sorry, go ahead,
Hey.
Josie.
Okay, hi.
Sorry.
Alison, sorry to be like a real dunce on this. I couldn't really find clearly when I was reading EDF's responses what had been the question from Bayes. I mean, could you or Paul or Charles, you know, give us the 2-second or the 2-minute dummy version of what were the 4 questions or 5 that Bayes asked?
There are actually 8, or might even be 9 questions that they asked over two sets of questions. And when you look at EDF's response in those main documents, which are referenced on the website, you'll actually see them saying, this is an answer to question. They'll start an answer to question, whatever number it is, 1, 2, 3. They just go through them in sequence, in actual fact. And if you then go back and go to the original question document from the Secretary of State, so you can see which ones they are, but they do actually headline them as to what they're about. And if you want to go back and look at what the question was precisely, they are there. So there is a cross-reference. And you'll see in the response that we've made jointly references back to we reference back to their question response numbers. So that gives you a tie-in to the documents that they've submitted. Okay.
I was hoping I could cheat off of what you've already written,
so
that I know
you
what
can
the
certainly find a way through the maze.
So yeah, it blew my mind when I tried to read EDF stuff. So okay, thank you for that, and I'll look at that when Alison gets it posted. That's super helpful.
No problem.
Thanks.
Just to say that web page is online now. So it's stopsizewellc/pre-decision. Sorry, my brain's a bit mush with the march on Sunday, so I tried to think of a better URL and that's all I could come up with. But we will put this video on there too. Mark, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alison. There's an awful lot about this that blows most of our minds, I think, Josie. My question was, there's been an awful lot of stuff on Twitter, a lot of which I think you've promoted, which is about the other alternatives by which our energy needs can be met. And it includes things like the speed with which you can improve the operation of the grid to accept more renewable energy, the obvious conservation measures that can be taken, and the investment in house insulation, all of the obvious things. Now, my question is, to what extent is any of that relevant in what we've been told should be the second half of our submissions? Or is that simply outside of the scope of the planning inspectors because it's about energy policy?
Well, I mean, I think that they will probably say it is outside the scope, but you shouldn't desist from saying what you want to say. You know, we saw in the examination how challenging it was to sort of talk about, you know, these issues in the policy and need. You know, it is clear the government stated policy is very strongly in support of nuclear energy. Now, we all think that's wrong for various reasons. So, it's pretty likely that they would not consider that in the context of reviewing the planning decision. But I would just say to you, this is an opportunity to convey messages directly to government ministers and officials. So you should say the things that you think are the most important.
What about the impact on jobs? I'm thinking of the negative impacts on jobs in terms of the volumes of traffic and so on.
Yeah, no, that is more relevant to the planning application, because EDF has obviously, made a case for, its economic strategies in the region. So anything that you say about that is totally relevant to the planning application for sure.
Thank you.
Alison,
sorry,
if
go ahead.
everybody else goes, can I suggest I'll just share my screen and I'll show people where the documents are. I know you put your little thing up, but nobody can read it. Can you enable screen sharing? Okay, can you all see the Stop Sizewell C screen? I hope you can. If you look under Take Action, here's the one, respond to the Secretary of State's request for feedback. If you click on that, here are all the links that I was talking about. And there's a sort of very short, brief overview of what we've actually sent. And down here is the link to the larger report, which is about 11 to 12 pages long. So there you go. Hopefully that's enough for you to see where to get it. Very simple.
Thank you very much, Paul.
It's all right.
And thank you for being honest that you couldn't read my sign instead of just politely ignoring it. I'm going to invite Sue Bale to ask a question.
Hi, Woodbridge Town Council. I think we will probably concentrate in our responses on the terrible answers that EDF have given to those questions from the Secretary of State. And the thing that I think that the key one, for me anyway, is the water. I mean, they simply have not come up with a solution, and that seems pretty majorly key to us. So I think that's probably what we're going to be concentrating on.
Thank you, Sue. I did have a message from Robin earlier today, and I'm just trying to find it just to see what else he recommended. He did recommend, in order to hit home, to try sort of to keep responses short and sweet. I mean, I do agree in communication terms, that is often how you have the most impact. But on the other hand, if you do write a bit more, then they've got to read it and it takes a bit more time. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He was talking about the importance of highlighting where the applicant simply does not have an answer. So trying to sort of bat things away, in particular, the water issue is an example of that. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to pass to Neil Poole.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me? Can you?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello everyone. I hope this isn't off topic, but this morning on the Today programme, Michelle Hussein was interviewing the one from EDF. And at one point, it was a very gentle interview, but at one point, Michelle Hussein said, you've got a lot of opposition to your proposal. And the EDF lady said, actually, when we do our polling, we get 2 to 1 in favour. Is that correct? Is it fact checkable and challengeable?
Hi, Neil. Well, we've only seen one poll that EDF has published, and it did show that there was a smaller group, a larger group that did not actively oppose the plant, but the wording was, we thought the wording was very suspect and we queried it at the time. So they had several categories, including strongly oppose, strongly in favour, tended to support, you know, didn't have an opinion either way. And then the other category was sort of strongly opposed. So there wasn't a tended to oppose category, you know, and I think it's entirely possible they would have got different answers if they had a sort of even set of categories. And the size of the survey also wasn't particularly big. So, you know, I think it's difficult to challenge something that's sort of said on the radio in real time, unfortunately, and we did challenge their poll at the time. But I think that you know, what's absolutely clear is this project is not a popularity contest in any case. You know, there are going to be a lot of issues and reasons why this project fails, and it's not necessarily going to be, you know, a democratic referendum on how many people in the area oppose it or don't oppose it. And I think one message we get back really, really strongly is that the Secretary of State is very, very aware that there is much stronger levels of opposition to Sizewell C than there has been to other projects in the past. So, you know, or at least it's manifested itself in a much stronger way. So I think that, you know, they know this opposition is real.
Well, it was right at the beginning, it was Kwasi Kwarteng's challenge to EDF, wasn't it, to bring us all on board? And
yeah,
he's patently failed to do that. And I just thought it was curious that EDF seemed to go unchallenged in saying that they've got a big majority in favour of the project.
I know. Well, I mean, Michelle Hussein hasn't got that information at her fingertips necessarily. So I'm not, you know, critiquing her for that. I mean, lots of people have said it wasn't a balanced interview, but, you know, I had a slot on the Today programme last autumn, you know, where I was interviewed for some minutes without any balancing voice. So, you know, I think we have to be a little bit sort of careful, because it'd be quite nice to have that opportunity again. You know, so I think, you know, we said directly to the Secretary of State in November, you know, that the community has not been brought with EDF, and senior BEIS officials who met representatives of over 40 town and parish councils in February, you know, would have known very clearly that communities have not been brought along with this project. So, I mean, I'm confident that that message is known in Whitehall, even if EDF say otherwise.
Okay. Thank you.
Chris.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, someone mentioned earlier about the urgency, and it's obviously a very sensitive area for EDF, basically saying about the urgent need for nuclear. And I think where people have the opportunity to say that EDF haven't really demonstrated that urgency themselves, the fact that they put a DCO application in and then immediately changed it and held everything up. They never did, never found the source for their potable water. They didn't do the surveys on the roads. I just think it's where you've got the opportunity to say it seems to evidence the fact that there isn't any real urgency, because the EDF haven't applied that to their own actions. And another area that sort of I have concerns about is a lot of things are a park that East Suffolk Council will take charge of after, if this project gets to go ahead. I mean, the one that stands out for me is the hard coastal sea defences, basically, that will need the East Suffolk Council's approval. And I just wonder what sort of kind of expertise they will have to do that, and whether that's worth pointing out. And then the other thing just comes to mind is this predetermination issue, that if we're writing these documents to go to BEIS, I don't see any harm in people sort of pointing out that they're very concerned that BEIS seem to have predetermined the application anyway. Thank you.
I'll just say to that, Chris, that, you know, there is a lot of stuff in the two responses that we've had on those issues about the coastal monitoring and mitigation plan. I have to say that Coastal Protection East, which are part of East Suffolk Council, are very competent, and although they're perhaps slightly curtailed by East Suffolk Council in some ways. They are, diligent on these issues, but on the other hand, there's no harm in taking a look at some of those things and challenging them, because actually some of the issues are still there and they haven't really done that. And they haven't answered the question, which I think Robin Saunders from Woodbridge asked, and he is a coastal engineer or has done a lot of coastal projects in his past, whether the coast can actually stand the hard coastal defence on it without it collapsing or sliding. Which would not be very good. If that happens, the whole project is dead anyway. So, yeah, just thought I'd mention it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
I've got two more, and hopefully we'll be able to call it a day after that. So if that's not the case, stick your hand up urgently. Marianne.
Thank you, everybody. There we go. I don't want to stray too far off the main topic, but I did want to mention just a couple of other things very briefly. With regard to the government's argument for nuclear as being homegrown, it has been confirmed that all the fuel in Sizewell B from the start until now is Russian origin, and the next refuelling, which is February 2023, will be Russian origin. The contracts have been ceased now. So the argument for the government saying building nuclear means we're not going to be reliant on Russian oil is obviously not true. Then just briefly secondary, I think knowledge in the industry and confidence of the industry is waning. Sizewell B, some examples recently, there's currently an issue with spent fuel element at Sizewell B, which means unless they resolve it, they cannot refuel in February 2023. They have to put a new safety case to the ONR to either cut the lid off one of the Holtec containers, which has never been done, and we found out that they don't know what the dose is that would happen. So all through this, EDF planning a new reactor tells us, trust us, it's proven technology, we know what we're doing. And yet with an existing power station, we found out recently, they don't know certain information, which is quite high levels on the safety scale of things. If they don't get the safety case to cut the lid off, they have to put in a safety case to move the cast to the dry fuel store, which is against UK legislation currently. So I'd be seeking to change that. But that's just one example where we cannot say that we have confidence in the industry to deliver a project which will be safe long term for this area. Okay. And lastly, if your parish and town council is not on this call, please ask them to respond. And if they want to speak to Alison about the technical topics to respond to, or if they want to speak to me about town and parish council kind of focus, then please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. Thanks for bringing up that town and parish council response as well. I'm going to pass to Emma Dowley.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Good. Charles, Paul and Alison, thank you very much for your input this evening. Paul referred just a minute ago to the fact that that we haven't established definitively whether the site can take it. Can you just remind us, I know there is an application out there to do these anchor trials and things, but how far has that application gone? And at what point do we have a time frame for when they might know whether this site is suitable or not? Because it seems to me absolutely staggering that we've got this far and they still don't know.
Yeah, okay, how to take that. So the current position is they have to do these trials, both the anchor trials to make sure, well, in EDF's words, they need to see how many of these anchors are going to be needed to hold the retaining wall up. So they believe it can be done, but it's a matter of how many of these anchors are needed. So they're going to test some anchors to actually do that. And they then also need to figure out how to deal with the part of the triple SI that they're actually going to build on, because it's marsh. I mean, it's marsh. So they have to dig a whole pile of stuff out and then stabilize the ground. That's the two parts of what they're attempting to do in these anchor trials. Now, the fact that they've now found marsh harrier nesting on site is going to cause them a little bit of a problem, because it means they won't be able to do anything. They were supposed to start these trials in April, but fortunately, if you like, Seventh Eastridge Parish Council had the application called in by the Department for Levelling Up and Housing and Local Communities, which they did. They actually found in East Suffolk's favour and said you don't need an environmental impact assessment, which is, considering they now found marsh harriers in the wrong place, is a little bit of a problem. But anyway, it does mean that they're going to be delayed yet again. So their April start is gone. There's no way they're going to, well, we've gone past April, but they're probably not going to be able to do anything now until at least June or otherwise. And they have to do a new habitat regulation assessment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be delayed. It's back with East Suffolk Council as a full application, but they have to go through that process now with East Suffolk. From our point of view, the other point of this particular trial is they're not actually doing any ground testing techniques where the hard coastal defence is going to be. There's nothing we can do about that. They've asked for permission to do what they're going to do, where they're going to do it. But it does mean that actually they still don't know what they will need to do underneath the hard coastal defence, because they're not testing that part of the area. Beyond that, the whole issue about things like how big the site is, where they're going to put desalination, if they were putting in desalination permanently, is another part of the issue, because they cannot put it on site. There is no room on the main site. That's why they're looking at potentially using either Goose Hill, or they're potentially using Sizewell A area, which is already in a planning application to be used by the Sizewell B relocation application. So it's really constrained, this site, and it really is a mess. And if you want to look at some of that, all of those arguments in that main document that we've submitted actually today. So please take a look at it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Okay, it's 5-2, so I'm going to make this the last question. John.
Alison, thank you very much. Really, to just follow up Emma's point, just to clarify, so in effect, that objection, they're able now to go ahead and do this work, but we don't know until when, and also we obviously don't know the result. The other question that came up was that they're also talking about mixing trials, and the point was made by a colleague who had expertise. I mean, you mentioned him earlier on from Woodbridge, who had expertise on this, the business about mixing, saying this is a highly specialized area. You're having to mix stuff in with the soil to stabilize it. Are they actually doing those trials to find out, Paul, or not?
Well, the application is still with East Suffolk Council, so it's not been determined yet, so they can't do anything right now. But yes, I mean, I would assume that, having said they're going to do this, they will get in the people who know how to do this. I mean, those companies exist. It's not going to be a bunch of EDF lackeys who go around and attempt to do this. It is a specialized job. And when I've spoken to Robin about this in the past, he's actually said, yes, I mean, there are companies who can do this. It's a specialized job. They will need to do it. But the area that it's being done in, and Robin actually also said this, is pretty unusual.
Yeah. I got that. I remember talking to Robin about it. I got that. Okay, yeah. You've answered the question. One other thing, you got us to a lot of PCCs to sign up to a letter that you sent in. What has happened to that letter? I mean, we agreed to support it. Has it had an effect?
Alison has mentioned the meeting we went to with Greg Hands online. She was actually in that meeting at the Bayes offices because she was actually down there to protest at Avivo's AGM as well. And that letter was actually handed to Bayes officials to be forwarded on to Greg Hands and the minister from that, which will happen. So that has been hand delivered.
Hand delivered. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much. And again, thank you very much for all of you for the work you're putting on this. It's extremely helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
Thank you, everybody. So just a reminder that we have until 23:59 on the 23rd of May to respond. If you have any queries or questions about what you should say, please don't hesitate to contact us. Be aware we're a little bit busy just over the next couple of days, and we sincerely hope that we're going to see all of you and all of your family and all of your friends on Sunday morning to march from Leiston to Sizewell. And if for some peculiar reason you hadn't heard about this event, yeah, it's we're meeting at 9:30 on Sunday morning at the Victory Road Recreation Ground in Leiston to march to Sizewell, where there'll be a rally, and we've laid on coaches to bring people back to Leiston afterwards. If you are a sucker for punishment and you've still got a bundle of energy, we're also doing a Sizewell C site walk on Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock. So that's a 5-mile circular walk. It takes about 3 hours, and we depart at 3 o'clock promptly from the Eel's Foot in Eastbridge. So if you only do one of those things, make sure it's the march. But if you're up for doing lots of those things, or both of those things, then it would be fantastic to see you there. So thank you very much. There's been some very interesting comments in the chat. We'll post this video online hopefully in the next 24 hours or so, and we'll no doubt send round an email on Monday just making sure that all of our supporters know that it's there and know what the guidance is, so that we can get lots and lots of responses to this. So as ever, huge thanks for your support. Let's raise a non-existent glass to a great weekend, and hoping the weather stays fine, and hoping to see lots of you on Sunday morning. All right, thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charles.